Triathlon Show 273. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode, I interview James Teagle, my fellow scientific triathlon coach. He's back on the podcast, and our topic for today is how best to train and prepare and also execute sprint and Olympic distance at triathlon races. We'll dive right into it after thanking our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Precision Hydration create electrolyte products that you can match to your individual sweat sodium concentration level. So you can have a strong electrolyte supplement if you lose a lot of sodium in your sweat, or a lighter one if you lose less. And they make it really easy for you to figure out where you should be, because they have a free online sweat test that you can take to get a good validated ballpark estimate for how much sodium you lose in your sweat, and also what your sweat rate might be. So how much fluid should you consume in total. So that after taking that sweat test, you will have actually a hydration plan complete for whatever goal race you put in that questionnaire. It just takes a few minutes to complete, so well worth the effort. And then if you want to buy Precision Hydration electrolytes, you can do that with a 15% discount using the code That Triathlon Show 15. And thank you to Roka, that you can find on roka.com. Roka are the world-leading manufacturers of wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses. I want to highlight a product today that I haven't talked about that much before, but it's the neoprene shorts, the Roka Sim shorts. They can be a real lifesaver when you try to get in a quality swim session on days when you might carry a lot of fatigue in your legs, or your legs just feel generally sinky for some reason. Just put on the neoprene shorts and you get that little extra buoyancy, and can still focus on having a really good stroke mechanics and getting a really good workout in, despite the fact that you might have had that fatigue or just heavy legs after perhaps a hard bike or run earlier. You can get 20% off your Roka order with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. So let's get into the interview with James Teagle. Just a quick apology in advance. I had a day of pretty bad allergies when doing this interview, so you might hear that in my voice, especially towards the end, I think. But let's just pray that James do most of the talking anyway, and you don't have to deal with that too much. So here we go, Coach James Teagle of Scientific Triathlon. So we're back with another podcast episode with Scientific Triathlon coach James Teagle. James, hello, how are you doing?
Hi, great. As well as you can be at this time. Nothing to complain about, and it's great to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you, and we have an exciting topic here that has been requested by a lot of listeners. So this will be a really interesting discussion, I think, about sprint and Olympic distance training, and particularly as it pertains to age groupers. Before we get into that, though, can you just remind the listeners that may not have heard your previous appearances on the podcast, kind of what your background in racing and in coaching is? Just a brief intro, so to say.
So yeah, on the race side of things. So I'm a British athlete, and I've been lucky enough to race in numerous championships on the Olympic and sprint distance scene, draft legal. I've been lucky to go to Junior Worlds, Under 23 Worlds, Senior Europeans, Racing World Cups, that kind of thing. So I've enjoyed my career there, and I've had a decent career. On the coaching side of things, I've been working with you for 3 years now in Scientific Triathlon. Before that, I was coaching at local clubs, coaching at swimming clubs, coaching at triathlon clubs. I got my degree. I got Loughborough University degree, and that's where I was training as well. So a lot of my knowledge, early knowledge especially, comes from the people I've met and the people I trained with. I've had the opportunities to work with some great physiologists and some great athletes as well. That's me in a nutshell. I hope that's okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's a perfect summary. Absolutely. And as you said, you've been coaching with Scientific Triathlon for 3 years, and that's across the board from very beginner level to very advanced athletes, and all across all distances. And on the short course, you have athletes that have been focusing both on the draft legal side of things and non-draft.
Yeah, it's been really exciting. Yeah, working with a whole range of athletes, and yeah, I mean, it's not boring, that's for sure. Different challenges every day.
So let's start with the following discussion. When we're discussing triathlon training and training for sprint or Olympic versus long course like half and full distance triathlons, what aspects of training do you think are similar regardless of the distance or the same?
So I think the thing to think about here and the thing to remember is a sprint distance, despite the name, is still an endurance sport. It's still going to take you, even for a pro is going to take just under an hour to complete that. It's not a sprint. It's going to be using, your endurance system. So some element of having a good aerobic system, aerobic base is going to benefit you across the board there, whether you're doing a sprint all the way to Ironman. So, that's something to think about. And, I feel like sometimes the sprint distance gets written off as kind of the new person's event, or, the event that's less superior to a full distance Ironman. But actually, it's still an endurance sport. And I think it's important people remember that. And as being part of an endurance sport, you still got to think about the general fitness aspects. So arguably on a sprint distance, your metrics like VO2 max are going to be more important. If you're getting really scientific, you're thinking things like second threshold being quite important. Especially first threshold is still important across the board though. But yeah, VO2 max, second threshold becomes more important than sprint distance, but it's still important. First threshold is still very important. And same with all the sports. Your economy is also very important. So no matter what level of potentially FTP you're holding, potentially threshold pace you're holding, you still got to be able to be economical doing that. And that's true across sprint distance, where you're trying to run 99% FTP or threshold pace, for example, off a bike, as it is to you're trying to run 80% of your threshold pace in a 70.3 or an Ironman. It's still there. And with that, swim technique is very important. There's still elements of nutrition that are important, elements of being consistent in training, very important. There's lots of similarities across all the sports, even though the distances do vary a lot. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if we look at the very, very world-class side of sprint distance racing, for example, right now on the men's side, Vincent Louis has been very dominant. On the women's side, Katie Zafiris over the last few years. Before her, Flora Duffy. Flora Duffy might be coming back now again. Before Vincent Louis, we had Mario Mola. A common denominator of all these athletes is that when they became the number one in the world, they weren't like the new kid on the block, the 20-year-old. That hasn't really happened since the Brownlees, I think. Right. But they're in their late 20s when they really start to dominate, whether we're talking about sprint or Olympic distance racing. And I think that's a sign of just the number of years it takes to really fully develop your aerobic potential. And it's just a sign of that is still the most important thing when we talk about even sprint distance triathlon, which for the elites of the elites takes less than 50 minutes.
Well, yeah, I mean, for the elite of elite, you're looking at that conditioning aspect being, actually how much percentage threshold, they've got to have a very good threshold and they've got to be able to run, fast, but actually how fast can they run off a bike? And that is what takes a long time to develop, I think. Actually being able to run fast off a bike, having that conditioning aspect, you might be able to run, 14-minute 5K. Can you do that off a bike? And I think that's what takes a lot of time. But yeah, that's the elite of elite, like you say.
Yeah. So if we discuss base training a little bit, we're in early February here as we record this, and a lot of athletes are going through their winter training for hopefully a summer racing season. Here in the northern hemispheres, at least the Australians are already in their racing season.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you are focusing, let's say that you have a fixed amount of training time per week that you're training at, and it doesn't matter what it is, let's call it 8 hours per week right now, and we have athlete A is training for sprint and Olympic distance races, and athlete B is training for half and full distance Ironman races. Do you think that the training they should be doing is very similar in this time of the season, or if it differs, how does it differ?
It depends on when your actual A race is going to be. First of all, so the classic periodized approach, in that way, your training might be fairly similar. You're going to be doing a fair bit of aerobic endurance work. You're probably going to be doing a bit around the top end as well, especially for a sprint and Olympic distance athlete. But the similarities are, it is, like I said, it's an endurance sport. So no matter what you're going to be racing, you're going to have to do some elements of endurance. Now, as your time is limited, 8 hours, you're going to have to probably combine some of that endurance within sessions. So one of the things you'll be looking at, especially, is, what are the specifics of the event? You don't want to get too far away from that. Now, you can get hung up on trying to develop your VO2 max power, your critical power, that kind of thing. And it's all very important, but actually, what are the specifics of the event? So I would be looking at it and thinking, okay, what event am I doing and where am I now? And, what does the event look like I want to do? If it's a mountain triathlon, then you need to be thinking about that now as well. Probably less so, but it's something you need to be thinking about. Actually, are you riding in position on your TT bike? Are you getting used to climbing? Yes, less important now, but still something to think about. And it really does depend on the athlete and when your race is going to be. So, let's say an example, you have a race in May, it's a standard flat distance race, you're racing Olympic distance. At the moment, you're coming off what I'd say is your standard winter block at the moment. You're probably just about to go into a bit more specific work. So you probably have been doing a fair bit around threshold. You're probably doing a fair bit of aerobic volume in that base block. And now you'd be transitioning over to doing probably a bit more sweet spot work, probably a bit more standard work on actually looking what your tempo pace is off a bike, looking at actually still incorporating some speed work there. But getting more specific at the moment, I'd say. And I don't want to, this year's been weird, so that's a normal year. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. So to summarize, there you would the specificity, there would always be some degree of specificity in the training, but actually now early February, if somebody has that A race in May, this is already a point where you would start to incorporate a bit more specificity. So actually, like when comparing this to a very traditional view of linear periodization, to me it seems like you would include more specificity, much earlier than the traditional periodization model.
Well, I think whatever you're doing in training has got to be specific. You've got to know what you're training towards. And, this applies to, this is the danger of throwing around numbers, because when you look at a sprint distance race for, a pro, that's going to take them under an hour. For some people, that might be taking 2 hours. So that's a completely different numbers you're looking at. You've got to know what you're aiming for. And you should have decided by now, actually, what am I aiming for? What do I want to do? What am I trying to achieve? Am I trying to win the race? Am I trying to just finish the race? Is my first one? That kind of thing is stuff that you should be thinking about at least. But you should have a good idea of what you're trying to achieve in your training, and being specific for that goal. It gives you something to target as well. But I think no matter where you are in your year, you need to be looking at what am I trying to race? You don't want to be racing something completely, you're training something that's completely irrelevant. Now there might be times where you look at an athlete and you're at 90% of VO2 max with FTP, and that's going to be a limiting factor. I need to work on that, and actually it might not be that specific to my event. But that's fairly rare. Most athletes can get away with increasing their VO2 max by training. Not a lot of people are actually limited by their VO2 max.
Yeah.
So it depends on the individual, depends on your circumstances, but throughout the year I would be looking at some kind of specifics to your race. I
totally agree with that. I have athletes that they had their off season, their 2-week break in the second half of October, and then they got back to training in November, and fairly early on, like let's say maybe their 4th week of training, we started doing specific blocks of Ironman training. So that might be just including 2 weeks, a 2-week block where a lot of training is really geared towards Ironman, and their target Ironman race power, in some cases, the difference between the target and their current ability is too big. So then we focus more on the current realistic power. But with many, it's more like, okay, we know that your goal is this, and you're not too far off from that. So let's start by building up to doing 90 minutes of work on the bike, for example, at that race power, and then gradually increase that and keep repeating these blocks throughout the year. So the athletes that started doing that in late November, then maybe did that in late December and in late January again, and just including specificity throughout the year. So I totally agree with that, but then also combining it with knowledge of the athletes' personal limiters, and as you said in the example of somebody might be limited by VO2 max, even though it's not that common.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Kind of what I'm trying to say there is, you don't want to you don't get stale in your training. And, if you're giving your athletes in November, a crazy Ironman race day, big day, okay, probably don't be doing that, but you want to be training in time trial position. You want to get used to that. Yeah. You want to get as aerodynamic as you can, that kind of thing. You want to get used to, this is how it's going to feel. Even if you are fair away from your racing. I'm not saying go and give yourself a really, really race specific hard Ironman. This is pretty much going to feel like session. But you want to be racing. You want to be training a bit of that tempo work, for example, or you want to be training a bit sweet spot, or doing some endurance riding. You don't want to do a massive amount of it. And as you get closer to racing, you might want to do more. Well, you will want to do more. But you should still be thinking about that, no matter where you are in season. One of the things you can do as an athlete or as a coach is you can you're looking at, you can go and look at the courses, and you can map them and map the files. You know exactly what you're up against. You can see what previous power outputs have been. You can pretty much go and look at a course and think, okay, what do I need to do to perform in this race? What kind of time will that give me? It's going to depend on weather conditions and who turns up, but that information is out there, and you can use it to your advantage.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's something that more and more in the last couple of years I've been starting to use in my coaching as well, to not just give, one race power or race pace when you're doing like some specific work, but actually it varies around some average race power or race pace, and including those variations in training. So if somebody is training for an Olympic distance race and they want to be holding 250 watts, then a 15-minute interval at race pace might look like 5 minutes at 260, 5 minutes at 240, and 5 minutes at 250 at the end. So including those variations. And that's just a very simplistic example, but it comes back to that specificity aspect. And another thing with that is that when you get to springtime and the roads start to get really nice and clear of snow, and the weather is also better, go out and do that on the road. Can you actually hold that power in your race position on the road, and not just in the perfectly sterile environment of your trainer and your pain cave? So those are all things related to specificity that are important. And
I think it's important. You mentioned it there. Is when you think about a course, especially a triathlon course, unless it's dead pancake flat with no wind, you're going to have to vary the power a bit. So you're going to have to get used to that. So a lot of athletes I see sat on the trainer holding X power. Actually, especially when you get into that specific kind of phase, you want to be aware that you're going to have to go up a hill. And actually, at that point, if you're chasing performance, you're going to have to vary your power there. You're going to have to go a bit harder if you want that time. And then there's going to be different parts of the course where potentially you got a bit of a tailwind. You don't have to work so hard. So it's actually looking at the course and not just sitting on your trainer holding X watts, for an hour. Actually, you need to put a few spikes in there sometimes. There's a point in doing that sometimes. You want to be able to ride at your average race power, but being aware that in the real world, that race power is probably not going to be, unless it's pancake flat with no wind, is not something you're going to be, you might be able to do it, but do you want to do it? I'm happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I like to do is even with general training, like let's say a general tempo ride, in particular on the bike, because that's where you have definitely bigger variations and spikes in power compared to the run. In the run, you can quite often be very controlled and steady. If you're racing, of course, like competing for the podium, then you might have surges and stuff, but that's more rare on the age group side of things. but on the bike, like let's say you have a 45-minute tempo ride, like start every 5 minutes with a 10-second sprint. That's something that I use quite a lot in with my athletes to just make sure that you are able to stay at that moderate intensity despite having just done a sprint, which you would do if you, even on a pancake flat course, when you get to the U-turn, because a lot of courses would not be just one single loop, but you would do them many times. So you get to U-turn, or you get to a turn of some sort and need to accelerate out of the corner, and that's a perfect simulation of that.
I mean, going back to the base phase, it's important to kind of throw that kind of thing in there, because you might come across these different aspects when you're racing. Now, typically when I'm on about, or when you're on about getting ready for a specific A race, we mean that A race. A lot of people in a normal year will race many times. So it's impossible to prepare, especially if you're looking for the course, prepare for all those course differences. You get obsessed with it. But you need to be preparing for that one race really, or maybe 2 races. But having that in your skill set, is not a bad thing. It's not going to do any harm to have that ability to do maybe 5 seconds. You don't have to be the best in the world at it, or you don't even have to be the best in your club at it or anything. But just having the ability to do that, it's an extra tool in the toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's discuss some specifics that can be used around what we already discussed here with specificity. So discussing around the race demands of sprint distance racing and Olympic distance racing. So if we start with sprint distance racing, and again, we're talking here from the perspective of age group athletes. And there are differences, of course, for the beginner versus the advanced athlete. So maybe give some of the key takeaways in terms of the race demands that age group athletes of different levels should think of.
I mean, I think I've already alluded, it is quite different whether because if you're a beginner, your aim is probably going to be to finish the race for that first one. Whereas if you're an age grouper and, you're fighting for the podium, or you're looking at qualifying for championships and things, and obviously your aims, the percentage power and the time you're going to be doing the event in is going to be a lot faster. So therefore, they are different demands. Obviously with sprint distance, 750 meters swim. A lot of people, whether they're age group beginners or veterans, that first swim of the year, the open water swim, especially in colder climates, it's not something they're used to. So being prepared for that, and being prepared actually, you're probably not going to be able to choose your pace for that first 100 meters unless you sit right at the back. Being prepared not to sit at one pace. If you're an age grouper who's just beginning, then actually being able to hold the distance and swim the distance is going to be important. So that's something you should be looking at in your training. Actually, can I swim this entire distance? If you're trying to fight for the podium, then you need to be, what kind of pace demand is that? It's only 750 meters. So you're going to have to be holding around threshold for that kind of distance. Where potentially, if it's a lot of people on the beach with you and it's a decent race, there's going to be people around you as well who are going to be hitting you accidentally, hopefully. But just being prepared for that and thinking of specifics of, how do I respond to that kind of demand of racing, and how do I respond to that kind of pace variation? Not just things like the pace I'm holding for the entirety, the average, but also, how fast are we going around these boys? Because I want to get my head down. I don't want to get anyone. Even if you're at the back of a field, it still happens. So people can't see what they're doing in the water half the time. So just being prepared for that. And also remembering that a lot of the time when you swim in the pool, you're doing so without a wetsuit. Now, depending on where you're going to do it, you may or may not be swimming with a wetsuit. If you're swimming with a wetsuit, your pace perception is probably going to be slightly different. Now, you can't really use your pace in the pool in open water swimming anyway, because there's so many different factors that play into that. Where tide, other people, actual length of the course, because they're rarely ever accurate. So just being aware of that as well. But one of the things you should be working on the pool is, what is my pace perception? Does this feel around about threshold? Does it match up with the time the coach has given me, or I'm getting myself off a pace clock? That's stuff you want to be thinking about in the water. Now, when you get out when you get out of the water, no matter who you are, you've got that transition. And over a sprint distance, transition is a large proportion of a race. Now, it's frustrating sometimes when you see athletes who think, oh, hey, it's transition, it's no rest time. It's not. It's part of a race. You need to run. If you're just aiming to get around that first time, then you can take it a bit more chilled if you're a bit nervous about completing the distance. But if you're aiming to do well in the race, you need to run. You need to make sure that's fast, and you need to practice that transition. Beginners need to practice it. Advanced athletes need to practice it because it's crucial. You can lose 30 seconds in transition easily. Some transitions have long runs as well, so it's something to look out for. Make sure the run is not too long, or if it is long, actually use that to your advantage. Make sure you're good at getting your shoes on. Make sure you're good at get your helmet on. Number belt, don't forget your number belt. That kind of thing. It's important, and it's important to practice that. Getting your wetsuit down. If you've got a wetsuit on, first thing you want to do is get that down. A lot of people have trouble with that, so practicing that at home, good idea, and it's going to save you time. It's a pain. Not a lot of people don't like doing it, but when you're training for marginal watts on the bike, then you may as well do that. It's going to save you 30 seconds. So yeah, that's important.
I think especially for advanced athletes that have a long history in the sport and are at that point of diminishing returns in terms of getting fitter, and every single increase in fitness is going to take a lot of training. That is, improving your transition time is probably where you can get the most time for the least training. You really don't need to do that much of it, but if you do it regularly, then you're going to like just a little bit of it regularly. So once a week, maybe bring your wetsuit to the pool and practice some deck ups and some transitions at the end of the last deck up. So removing your wetsuit, that sort of thing. And when you get out on the bike, actually don't get in your shoes right away, but have them strapped with the elastics to the bike and jump on that way. So it's just adding another 1 minute to your bike ride by doing that preparation. But then if you do that once per week or more, then you're going to be that much better at doing it in the race.
And you can practice that stuff year round, right? It's going to be more on your focus, and it's going to be more useful the closer you do it to the race. But if you're nervous and it's something you haven't done before, or you're quite new to the sport, the earlier you start practicing that, the less mistakes you're going to make. In terms of clipping in shoes and then going with elastics, you're going to lose time if you don't do that. It's it's the skill that I think a fair few people are a bit nervous about doing, and because there's some hilarious pictures of people jumping over their bikes, so you've got to be careful. But yeah, it's worth practicing and making sure you got that nailed, because if you do that on a race day and it's the first time you've done it, then it's probably not going to end that well. So with kids, you do it with on the mountain bikes. You get them just to jump on the bike and off the bike. With adults, you could probably clip in on some grass or something, and with maybe a cross bike or something, or even on your normal road bike if it's fairly dry. You've got to be careful and take your time with it. You can practice things like just taking your foot out when you're riding and then putting it back in without looking at your feet. That kind of thing is quite useful. But yeah, practice makes perfect there. It's definitely those little things that will add up. If you get them right over someone who doesn't, you can easily lose a minute and a half. I've seen it happen in transition. So yeah, it's important. So once you're out on the bike,
can I go back to a point that? Can I go back to a point on the swim there? So I think you mentioned pace perception, and that is key. And I think for the beginner, it's more about learning to not go out too fast, learning to find as quickly as possible your sustainable pace. And that doesn't have to be something that feels very hard. If you're just aiming to complete the race rather than compete for podiums or things like that. So the pace perception there in not starting too hard is the most important thing. But for the advanced athlete that is going for podiums, what is more important there really is to be able to start really, really hard and then still be able to swim hard after that, even though inevitably your pace is going to drop off. But the time is short enough that you should be able to hold on, even though the first 100 meters or so are going to be brutally hard. And that's something that you can and should, in my opinion, build into your training.
Well, there's several scenarios there. As a beginner, I'd just like to add, if it's your first race, you're gonna have adrenaline. You're gonna go out hard. when I was swimming, swim at a decent level, when you're swimming, or saying to kids, the coach, it's like, if you're doing a 400 meter swim, you're going to go fast in that first 100 meters. It's going to happen. You're not going to have to think about it. It's the next 300 meters you need to worry about. So yeah, just being prepared for that on race day, actually, if you're a beginner, to hold back a bit. Yeah. Like you say, as an advanced athlete, you might need to go quite hard at the start. It really does depend on the course, though, because I've seen courses that are 100 meters to that first buoy, where it's critical to get around that first buoy as quickly as possible. I've also seen courses where it's just 750 meters straight. In that case, you can be a bit more relaxed about it, because those guys who go out too fast will end up coming back to you. The problem is if you've got a really tight turn initially, and this is why you need to look at the race course. If you've got that tight turn initially, you are going to get strung out, because that buoy strings everyone out, and actually trying to overtake everyone is really hard work. If it's a long way to that first buoy, it's going to be more bunched up, and it's not going to be so hard to actually move around the pack. So being aware of that is really important. Especially if you're racing at the top level, you want to be, this is getting really technical now, and I don't want to put anyone off, but if you are looking at racing well and racing hard, whether it's a draft legal sense or a non-drafting sense, we know that the swim will probably half your W prime. So if you swim hard, your W prime is going to be about half. So it gives you less matches to burn on the bike. So that's something you want to think about, is actually the way you pace a swim is going to impact the rest of your race. Now, in elite racing, in top end level of age group racing, you've got no choice. You've got to go with it. But yeah, just being aware that there's going to be a cost somewhere in the line to that as well.
Yeah, and I take that point. That's a really great point. I think that to some extent, even regardless of the course, you will have, unless you're absolutely one of the fastest swimmers in the field, you will need to start hard because somebody else is starting harder than you, and potentially by starting hard, you can get on their feet and then swim faster than you would otherwise do by getting some slightly faster feet to follow. But yeah, you're right. It's a kind of a trade-off there between the benefit of doing that and the cost of having your W prime.
You don't want to blow up and be unable to swim threshold either after that first 100 meters.
Yeah.
But sometimes in those longer buoy races, where it's a long way, say 400 meters to the first buoy or 350 meters, if you go out slightly easier, for most people, you want to go out at a reasonable pace still. It's not going to be, if you're looking at an advanced level athlete, you're still going out fairly hard, but you're just saving your matches a bit so that actually you can build through the group when everyone who's gone out too hard goes backwards. In general, the closer the buoy is to the start, the faster you want to go at the start. Because you're going to want to be around that first buoy as high up as possible. But for a beginner, it's a bit different. It's just trying to get around the course, try and pace that sensibly. Don't get carried away with nerves, because you, like I say, you will be nervous when you start. You go too hard. Just be aware of that. As a beginner, it's different for
right. So
there's a difference there. Yeah. Does that make sense?
So let's continue with the bike.
Okay. So with a bike. So again, it depends on your level of conditioning, what you're trying to do. So percentage of FTP is going to mean different things for different people. If you're a very well conditioned athlete, racing at the top end, you've got a lot of experience, then you can be racing just under threshold, to be honest, on sprint distance. You're going to feel it as you come out of the water. Your heart's going to be pounding, but you can be racing there. You got to know you can run off a bike with that in your legs, but you can be racing there. As a more beginner athlete, and it's going to take you slightly longer to race to complete the course, you need to go a bit steadier. You can't be at that same percentage of threshold. That's the difference there. Again, as I've already said, you got to look at the course you're doing. If you're going straight out of the swim and it's up a mountain, you want to be careful with actually, where those bits are. You're going to have to go harder. So it's better to go harder up the mountain and then maybe relax a bit on the descent. If you're looking for the best time possible. If you're beginner aiming to get around the course, you want to pace it, as best you can. The less variation in pacing, the easier it's going to be for you. If you're an advanced athlete trying to race as fast as you can, you're going to have to put different spurts into different times. You don't want to go crazy. You're still going to be a cost to it again. But if you're more conditioned, you can cope with it better. So it really depends on the athlete there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And again, like you need to train for that. We need to remind the listeners of that. So if you're going up a mountain as you're coming out of T1, for a beginner, maybe they don't have a choice but to go at a higher percentage of threshold, maybe even at threshold or even above threshold, as much as they would want to, but they can't because of the gearing and the grade. So if that is the case, knowing that in advance and being able to train for that, so training for, let's say, a 5-minute segment where you're going really hard, where you're going at threshold, and then recovering for 2 or 3 minutes going down the hill, and then doing the same thing again, or if that is what the course is like, then that's something you should be training at. And likewise, if you're an advanced athlete and you know that, okay, people are going to go out all guns blazing up that mountain, and I need to be with them, then you need to train for that, and that might mean going above threshold for a while. And if the hill is, I'm thinking of a race that we had in the World Cup last autumn in Sardinia, I think, where they went up a really long, reasonably steep hill, and there wasn't that much pedaling going down. It was just kind of several minutes. There was pedaling, but not hard pedaling. And so if that is your course, then you need to make the most out of the time up the mountain when you're actually pedaling.
I think that's what I was going to say. Is it does, if you're looking at draft legal racing, this is where there's a big difference in that. If you're non-drafting, you've got a bit more control over how hard you're pushing. If you are drafting, then you've got less control because that those packs that form on the bike are going to be very important to how the race is going to unfold. So you want to be making sure that you've trained for the specifics of that event. So especially on draft legal side of things, you can end up with races that end up just being kind of just continuous sprints in and out of corners, which is a very different race. For example, if you go on Race Lausanne or something like that, or some kind of course where, there's steady climbs and descents. It's a different kind of training stimulus. So you want to be prepared for that. You get flat courses as well. So draft legal side of things, you really need to look at the course. But it also applies to non-drafting. You still need to look at the course because, especially if you're racing at the top end of that, you need to know where you're going to push, where the headwind's going to be, where the fastest times in this course. You need to practice your sessions in aero position as well, because it's fine having a great FTP set up like this, but you're like a wind block when you're racing. So you're not going to be able to hold the same percentage. Well, you're very rarely able to hold the same percentage of FTP in aero position as you are sat up. Just chatting like this. So it's exactly about your training as well. So it's great. Look at the numbers, but don't kid yourself. If you're not in aero position, you're going to be able to hold that when it comes to race day.
Yeah, and being able to, as much as possible, stay in the aero position when going through corners, for example, practicing those skills of it in the outdoor environment. And this is something in this Swift world that we live in is more and more important to remind athletes that at the end of the day, we race the bike outdoors, and it's a time from point A to point B, or from the start of T1 to T2 that matters in terms of the bike, at least, and that's not necessarily just how much power you can put out on the indoor trainer.
And when we're looking at that specific training block, you want to be training with your equipment at least some of the time. You want to be racing with the equipment you're going to be using. You want to be on your TT bike. You want to be, you want to have some experience using your wheels, using all of your equipment. You don't want to be leaving that until race day. You want to know how it feels if your deep section's on to get blown by the wind. For example, if you're in that aero position, and you're getting blown around, then that's going to feel pretty uncomfortable if you're not used to it. The same kind of thing, like you said, you need to be able to go down hills if you're serious about sport, trying to win. Obviously, if you're trying to get around, you've got other aims. That's perfectly fine. But if you're trying to win the sport, you need to be able to do that in aero position, right? And it's, it takes skill. You've got to be able to do it. You got to practice it. It's not going to happen on race day. There's so much. You can go and train the power all day long, and I'm guilty of this as much as everybody. I love going on Zwift, but you need to be able to ride outside as well. So don't neglect that. Don't forget that the race is outside on race day. Yeah,
and what you mentioned there with in the wind with your deep section wheels, that's important. Something that I'm working on and struggling with a bit, to be honest, I need to improve, shall we say, is to be able to go fast downhill in the aero position when the roads are wet. I'm a bit scared of that. Not the most confident when cornering on wet roads. So,
then,
so that's another thing that can
it's
make
not
or
great.
break a race if you do that well versus not that well.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that happen. People who can take the course, people who can't take the course, people who are not willing to take the risks, but have actually practiced and know how to handle it. And that's where things like equipment choice also comes useful. You don't want to go on racing cobbles and 23 millimeters.
Yeah.
You can get puncture. It's not very comfortable. I'm guilty of that. That's how I know. It's not comfortable. You want to be thinking about the course, and you also want to be practicing it's not just corners and things, it's also road furniture. Triathlons take place in the real world. There's going to be bumps, especially they often go through villages. There's often bumps in villages, so being prepared for that and knowing how that feels. You're not going to want to slow all the way down, but you want to know, okay, do I come off the aero bars this? Am I feeling comfortable? Is my bottle going to fly out as well? It's something to think about, because that kind of stuff, you want to practice it.
Yeah. Oh, personal anecdote. I have a new bottle carrier and bottle carrier adapter and new bottle cages. And over the last week, I have lost 3 bottles through launches. It's absolutely insane. But it's good that I'm learning this now and not 1 week before the race.
Not on race day. Yeah. So, you see people riding around with no bottles, on there.
One more question. So we talked a little bit about what percentage of FTP different levels of athletes can, but can you give some guidelines for, if we're discussing here a more simple, flattish course with not too many corners or cobbles or like weird things like that, just a fairly simple course, what should a beginner athlete maybe be able to hold versus an intermediate versus an advanced athlete?
So beginner athlete, we're coming at this from no sporting background. It's pretty much just, this is your first kind of endurance sport. You're probably aiming, if I'm honest, to get around the race. You should be aiming somewhere. As a beginner, being cautious here, I'd say somewhere in the 80s, somewhere in the low 80s percent FTP. The more advanced you get, the higher that percentage of FTP can be. At the top end, like I say, you're probably racing 97, 98% of FTP, and you'll be okay. But that's properly advanced athletes. You've got to remember it's still a race where you've done a swim beforehand, and there's still going to be some bits of you could be racing 100% FTP, but there's going to be times when you're racing over FTP. Just remembering that. Basically, the more conditioned you are, the faster you are, the higher percentage of FTP you're going to be able to hold. The newer to the sport you are, the less endurance background you've got, the lower percentage of FTP you're going to be able to hold, because it's going to take longer as well.
And perhaps now that we're on the topic, let's do the same for the Olympic distance.
Yeah, if I'm honest, the Olympic distance is not massively different. I would argue it's pretty similar. On the beginner side of things, you're slightly more cautious, starting in the 70s and then building through. On the elite side of things, all the way, for age group, advanced age group athletes, you could be looking at 95% FTP, 94, 93% FTP. And you're going to be looking at like 97% FTP for a pro athlete on that kind of course. So that's kind of your variation. It's still similar energy systems. You're still going to be using similar energy systems. Still, you're going to be taking nutrition as well. It's still going to be fast and furious. So there's not going to be a massive amount of difference there. There's going to be a couple of percentage points of FTP. But that's where it comes down to the two events being slightly different as well. So you need to be, you can be a fit athlete, done loads of fast work, but if you've got no conditioning in you, then for the Olympic distance, you're going to struggle and you're not going to be able to hold the same percentage of FTP as you would have been able to hold had you done that conditioning. So you see athletes who can race very well over sprint distance and perhaps struggle slightly more over the Olympic distance. And that's the conditioning side of things. It's not necessarily where their FTP is, it's actually how able are they to push their FTP. So, again, it depends on individuals. Don't think that you can go straight from sprint distance and hold the same percentage of FTP. You can't. You need to be able to condition yourself to do that.
I actually tend to be... Yeah, no, I agree with that. But I actually do tend to be a bit more conservative with the Olympic distance when guiding athletes to what sort of power to hold. For an intermediate athlete, I would say probably 90%, and the advanced, I would say that somewhere between 90 and 95, so call it 93. And I've seen athletes get to 95%. It happens, but I think it's not something that I usually expect to happen. It happens on good days for a good age grouper that is well conditioned. So yeah.
And that's where it comes down to knowing the athlete as well, and knowing how condition they've got. Especially when you're starting to work with an athlete initially, you don't know you've probably got the background in Training Peaks, so you can use that as a bit of information. You've got, hopefully you've had a full winter's worth of training, so you've got a fair bit of data there. So you can be fairly precise with that kind of data. But if it's, if you take on an athlete, or you're an athlete who's just, mid-season decides to get involved, then you're gonna have to be slightly more cautious about that. And that's where either you yourself need to think about it and think, okay, this is where the individual difference lies. And like I'm saying, I'm trying to get my point across here. There's a massive range. It kind of depends who you are. So yeah, just because one person can do one thing doesn't mean you can do that as well. Or vice versa. So you need to think about that. Either you or your coach need to think about, okay, what's realistic here? What kind of athlete am I? What background have I got? And what power numbers would be realistic?
Yeah, and then let's move on to T2. Anything you want to mention about that, and then following that, the run.
Yeah, T2. Make sure you know where the dismount line is. So when you go in transition in the morning, I forgot to say this: walk the course. Make sure you know where the mount line is. Make sure you know where the dismount line is, and have a look if there's any road furniture going into that dismount as well, or anything you need to look out for. Because a lot of the time, these courses are on laps. It's very rare you do one lap for any kind of race, maybe on sprint distance. But, a lot of the time, these races are on lapped courses. So, yeah, have a look, because often that finish shoot is slightly different. So have a look actually where the bends are, where you need to take your feet out. If you're an athlete who's going to take your feet out, I think that's a great skill to get. So practice that as well in training, is actually taking your feet out before you get to the dismount line. And actually practicing just dismounting like that and what speed to do it at. And if you're going to do that, you need to know where the dismounting line is, because you don't want to do it too late or too early, for that matter. It's better to do too early than too late, though. Unless you're racing, there's a lot of you only doing a draft legal race, in which case there's probably an argument you could leave it a bit later, but it's a bit risky. For most people, it's better to do it earlier rather than later, because at least you can pedal. To look out for, so that dismount line. Know the route into transition. So often the way you run into transition, there's going to be slightly different funneling in transition. So when you run out, you're probably going to go through one exit. When you come back in, you're probably going to come back through a different exit. And that's why I say walk the course, so know where you're going. Make sure you know where your bike is. So yes, when you come out of transition the first time onto the bike, you should know where your bike is. It's a bit easier to spot. Try and find some kind of landmark that's not going to move, that's next to your bike. When you come in from transition, all you're going to have is your trainers there. And the problem with that is everyone's got the same trainers nowadays. Everyone's running those carbon trainers. So, a lot of people are going to have the same trainers as you. So make sure you know where your spot is, because the last thing you want to be doing in transition is running up and down thinking, where is my spot? There's nothing worse than that. And then, in transition, you don't want to be getting too flustered. You want to be calm head. You want to have like a process you tick off in your head. This is what I'm going to do. Take my helmet off, bike away first, helmet off, that kind of thing. Nice process. Have practice it in training. Don't make it your first time. Know where the run exit is, and then head out for the run. That'll be my process for transition. And then when you get on the run, distance.
Sorry, can I jump in there with some comments? So I think that the landmarks thing is really crucial, and I just want to highlight that. And what we're talking about here is things like buildings, or maybe a particular looking tree, or some other big plant, flagpoles, portaloos, things like of that nature, so that you know that when you
it's not going to move.
Yeah, when you have scouted the course, you go through, okay, this is the way I will walk in when I come into T2. I will walk past these first 2 rows of bikes or bike racks, and then I have this portaloo on my left. And at that point, when I pass the portaloo, I know that, okay, the next row is mine, something like that. That's how you will very easily be able to find your bike rack and your position in transition. And then even beyond that, knowing, so, okay, this bike rack is there's one rack and then the next one that follows from it and so on. So I'm at the beginning of the third one, for example, knowing things like that to make it really easy, because it's even when the bike is there, even in T1, I find it really difficult to actually spot your own bike. And I have a very particular looking bike riding a Ventum, but despite that, it's not easy. Like those landmarks are just so much better and quicker to use to find your spot in transition, both in T1 and T2.
You've got to know that. You got to look at it. And then the other thing I was going to say is, we've made it sound very complicated. It's not complicated. It's just know where your bike is and just find that spot and walk the course. That's all you need to do. There's no you don't need to count the number of racks. You can if you want, but you don't need to. It probably help, but don't make it too complicated. Don't overcomplicate it, but walk the course and know where your bike is.
I agree with that. Actually, for me, I do find that it helps. That's for me is the simplest. When I get to the right row, for me, that's just the process that works for me. It depends a bit on what the transition area actually looks like, but whatever it is that you do, you need to have done the scouting beforehand and decided that, okay, this is how I'm going to identify where it is. So good call there. You don't need to make it too complicated, but you need to know what you're doing and how you're finding it.
And the other thing I'd say is sometimes when you look at those maps of transition, or maybe it's your first one, it can be a bit confusing. So I would, those marshals are usually there, and they're there to help you. They will help you. So if you're unsure on which way things work in transition, ask them. They're there to help, and they'll probably want to help. So if you're unsure, ask. That's all I'd say. But certainly walk the course in transition.
And
okay.
Again,
right. So
just one more thing. Remember to, in training, when you're getting off the bike, practice dismounting the bike. That's something that is very easy to do. You can do it anytime you're out for a bike ride and getting back home. Just doing that dismount instead of just stopping the bike and then unclipping.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to lose a lot of time doing that. You've got to completely stop the bike. You've got to undo your shoes. You've got to run in your shoes. Whereas someone who can do that skill, you're going to save so much time. Running in your shoes, for starters, is not that fast. Yes, running barefoot is not that comfortable, but it's better than running in shoes a lot of time if you're going for speed. If you're a beginner, then, it's okay. You're trying to get around the course. Don't do too much stuff at once. But, if you're advanced or intermediate athlete, that's a skill that's quite easy to learn to do. You just need to practice it a bit. Even when you finish a ride, before turning to your house, just do a couple of times of just undoing your shoes, like I say, putting your feet on your shoes, slowing down your bike. Don't even bother getting off your bike. Just do that a couple of times, and then start to get used to the dismount. After that, you can do it on every ride you do if you're unsure on how to do it. It becomes second nature.
And if you're a beginner, I would say that many of these things, dismounting, a flying dismount or flying mount, you don't need to do these things. I think the things that are important for beginners when it comes to transitions is just knowing where your stuff is. So doing that scouting properly and knowing where the mount line is and where the dismount line is. Do that, and then the rest of it you can take it pretty easy. Don't rush things. That's the most important things. Don't rush things, because then you're gonna be slower.
Don't try and do everything at once. You're going to get there, but maybe make that first triathlon you're on where, you learn, this is what triathlon feels like. This is how it works. And maybe the next one that's when you put the time in for that. But don't put too much pressure on yourself if you're a beginner. You're doing the race for the first time. It's going to be a learning experience. There's going to be some things that, you need to know. That, you're only going to get out doing race practice. Even advanced athletes, they've got lots of experience. That first one of the year is often quite rusty, even if they've done a bit of racing before that. So, don't put too much pressure on yourself, basically. Okay. And so that's the transition. Like I say, just don't panic in transition. But when you're on your way out of transition, you want to be thinking about your run. Now, if you've got a 10K run or a 5K run, you're going to have your pace targets. Now, this is where it gets specific to the individual as well, and actually your mentality. I see a lot of people race out of transition really hard, flying, ready to go, feel great. A lot of people, jelly legs, don't feel so great, and it takes a bit of time to work into it. So, do a couple of brick runs in your training before you race. Brick runs for me, not massively beneficial in terms of physiology, but actually in terms of psychology and knowing how things work and how you actually in a race, it's great. You need to do it. So incorporate in your training and just know how you feel, so it's not a shock on race day. And practice running at your race pace in those as well. So don't just run off, as fast as you can because you got a K rep off a bike session. Make it your actual race pace. Now your race pace can depend on who you are. If it's a sprint distance and you're a beginner, it's going to be about going out and trying to complete a distance. So starting off nice and cautiously and working into it. If you're someone who's going for the win and going to race and you've got a lot of conditioning, you can be racing, if it's a 5K, you can be racing, you're not going to run 5K PB, but you probably won't be too far off it. This is the top end, guys, by the way. And then, middle of a range, intermediate triathlete, you're going to be running, you're going to have to think, okay, so this is a 5K, I'm probably going to run about tempo pace here. So tempo pace for me is anywhere from 85 to 92% of your threshold pace. So that kind of range as an intermediate or intermediate advanced. And again, the more advanced you are, the faster you're going to be able to run, the more conditioning you got. And then when we look at the Olympic distance in comparison to that, it kind of comes down to conditioning. So, you can hold similar numbers. You're not going to be able to run anywhere near your 5K PB, but you can probably run somewhere near your 10K PB or not far off it, like 97, 96% of it as a very, very conditioned advanced athlete. As a beginner athlete, you want to be cautious on that again. Somewhere down, somewhere in zone 2 would be beneficial. And then everywhere in between, you're probably going to get a lot of athletes in that zone 3 running, the more conditioned you are, the higher zone 3, less conditioned you are, the lower zone 3. And that's irrespective of your pace. I've got 60-year-old guys who, very, very conditioned. Obviously, they're not going to be running the fastest times they've ever run in their life because they've done some fast runs when they were younger. But, in terms of that conditioning and things, their PB now, they're getting pretty close to their PB now because they're really conditioned. Whereas you're just taking up the sport, then, you're not going to get that close to your PB because you haven't got the conditioning yet. So just cutting yourself a bit of slack. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I agree with that by and large. I think that actually I would say that on the 10K for the very well-conditioned athlete, I would almost say that, you can run that right at your threshold. Whereas in your open 10K race, you would race it slightly above threshold. Not much, but ever so slightly if you're running like 37, 36, 35, 34, 33 minutes or so. And on the 5K, likewise, you would be even in a triathlon, you could be slightly above threshold if you're very well conditioned. So I would say those as kind of the high end of what might be achievable when you're well trained and well conditioned to those distances.
It is very individual though. So just be, like I said already, don't compare yourself to someone else because you got to know your background. You got to know, okay, what kind of endurance sports you've done in the past. And this is where things like running economy become very important. Now, running economy probably to beginners sounds quite scary. Running economy is basically, how economical or how efficient you are with your movement when you're running. You can work on that. And this is where, yes, running a lot helps. It definitely does. It definitely does help. Just give me a second. Forgot to turn the laptop charge on. Is that right? Sorry. Yeah, so I'll start again. So it definitely does help to be conditioned through running. So the more running you do, the more conditioned you're going to be generally if you're in good form. That's a broad sweeping statement, but generally true, I think. I'd say anyway. But you can incorporate things like strength work into your training, some plyometrics. Now the strength work is especially important, I'd say, when it comes to running because you don't want to get injured, and a lot of injuries do occur on the run side of things. So if you incorporate something that's going to help out your robustness, so make you more robust, maybe some calf raises, some work on your hamstrings, work activating the glutes as well, because a lot of people have trouble activating the glutes. Their hip flexors are constantly on because they're sat down like we are now. That's something you want to, you need to think about in the gym, and that's going to help you with your running robustness and your running economy. Incorporating some plyometric work, is going to help with your running economy as well. You don't want to be too advanced, you don't want to get too advanced about it if you're a beginner athlete, but a little bit of it is probably not going to hurt. But yeah, it depends on your background of sport and actually where you are. But certainly, I'd say it's definitely neglected, is that work you do in the gym, that work you do that's not necessarily the run specific stuff that will help at the end of a run. Because don't forget, it's not only 10K, it's also 10K off the back of 1,500 meters of swimming and 40 kilometers of cycling. So your running economy is going to be less at that point, regardless of who you are. But the best are going to have more conditioning and they're going to be able to run, as you say, almost at threshold. And if you're completely new to the sport, your running economy is not going to be great, and you're probably going to be suffering for that.
Yeah, and just going back to the beginner pacing a little bit, you said it already, but just go out conservatively. I think that a good piece of advice would be to take the first fifth of the race, so the first 1 kilometer in a 5 kilometer race and the first 2 kilometers in a 10 kilometer race, to really give yourself permission to go way slower than you think that you should be going, and then assess how you feel at that point. And then you can start to up the pace if you feel that, okay, actually this is sustainable for another 4K or another 8K in the case of the 10K. So, but have a specific, and it's not as if it's like as if 1K or 2K for the Olympic is any sort of magical or particular numbers, but just give yourself enough of a time at the beginning of the race to work your way into it and make sure that you don't go out too fast. So in that sense, put a ceiling on your pace for a given amount of time, and then you can reassess how you feel.
Yeah, I mean that, as a beginner athlete, run with a watch gives you a bit of perspective on how fast you're running. I say to athletes, don't worry too much about that. It's go more by feel, but that's probably more advanced athletes who would say that too. You still have some perspective of your pace. I say that what you just said about beginner athletes, age group beginner athletes is true also of advanced athletes, in my opinion. Especially the guys who I say I know are going to go out too hard. So I say, look, that first K on a 5K, make it easier than you feel. Going back to that 400 meter analogy, you're going to feel like you can absolutely, it's not going to hurt you that first K. That first 100 meters or 400 meters doesn't hurt. It's the next 300 meters that hurts. So it's the same kind of thing with a 5K. Hold back for the first K and then reassess. And then by the end of the race, you're kind of doing the opposite. It's okay, you're really pushing yourself and putting yourself in a bit of a hole in the last couple of K. But you should not be doing that on the first K. So it's just about pacing and being aware of that. And it's knowing, if you're a coach, knowing the type of athlete you got, and if you're an athlete, it's knowing what kind of personality you've got and how you're going to respond to that. Especially because people around you, and they're in a race with you, and you're going for it. So they might not have it right either. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. You need to be have a plan for yourself and be confident in that plan. And then even when other people might be running past you in that first kilometer or two, just ignore them, because they will be coming back to you. And I think that applies more so than ever in the triathlon on the run, because that's when stuff hits the fan, so to say, and a lot of people will blow up. So don't be the person that blows up.
And be aware that things like the temperature and things like, even I've had athletes go and race at altitude. Just be aware that's going to have an influence on how fast you run. If it's really hot and really humid, you're not going to run as fast as you usually would. You're going to have suffered. And the same thing with altitude. Obviously, being aware that if you've just gone up to altitude, having done no prep, and unfortunately, a lot of people have that predicament because they can't spend 2 weeks altitude before a race. But I'm thinking of certain races here that I've seen athletes go and do, and just being prepared for that. Your threshold pace and threshold power on both bike and run and swim going to be lower. There's that. And going back on what you just said about having a plan. Yeah, that's something that I'd reinforce for any race, is have a plan. And that's got to be, especially if you're a beginner, but it doesn't matter who you are really, having a plan from things like, okay, what's my list? What do I need for the race? Because that's important. The amount of times I've left a tri belt at home because I think, you just forget the tri belt or something like that, or and actually then knowing things like your nutrition, what you're going to eat on race day morning is important. People get nervous on race day morning, so if you've practiced it, you should have practiced it in training. Practice your pre-race breakfast. Know how much you can eat, know how much you can tolerate. Get to the course nice and early, especially with COVID. It takes a bit longer. Probably getting a temperature check, that kind of thing. Spacing out transitions. Be prepared for that. Know where the admin tent is, that kind of thing. Where you got to pick your race pack up. Things like actually knowing when you can warm up and where you can warm up. Important. With COVID, a lot of people are stuck inside transitions. So you're going to have to go for a little run before you go in there and probably do some jumping on the spot, get your bands out while you're in transition, because that's all you're going to be able to do. If it's a normal racing scenario, perhaps you're lucky to be in Australia at the moment, or hopefully in 6 months' time when we can race properly. Hopefully, you can do a warm up properly, but have it all planned out and know what you're trying to do. Things that one thing I think everyone forgets is and it's a bit crude, but know where the toilet is, and also know you probably want to take some toilet paper with you, because just be prepared for that. That's always one that catches people out, I think. You don't want to be uncomfortable when you're starting a race. And obviously things like knowing the course, essential, knowing what nutrition you're going to take on the course. If it's Olympic distance, you want to take in some nutrition. Even sprint distance, you want to take in some nutrition, arguably, especially if it's going to take you a bit longer. Just having that all planned out. And knowing things like threshold pace, what you're aiming for on the course, that kind of thing is important.
That was a great rundown, and I'll also link to some additional episodes that we've done in the past on race plans. But that was all great. We've already been talking for more than an hour, so I have a couple of other questions that I do want to get to, and the first one would be some general advice, and let's pull the sprint and Olympic distance discussions together here again. And let's focus this maybe on the typical intermediate age group athlete. So what would be some general advice around things like a training intensity distribution? We already talked about they are both endurance events. We also talked about the importance of specificity. But if you were to describe like training test distribution, not necessarily in terms of percentages, but just qualitatively, what do you have to say about that?
So your race is going to be in zone 3. A lot of it, you need to be training in. You need to have done some training in zone 3. I'm not saying don't spend all your training in zone 3 by all means, but you need to have done some training in zone 3 because that's where your race is going to to be. If you're doing that, that's kind of
if it is there, model, because it might be in zone 4, depending in a sprint distance.
Yeah, it might be in zone 4. Yeah, it might be in zone 4 for sprint distance. So you need to be thinking about what your training you're doing and what the specifics of the event are. So zone 3, zone 4 for sure. You need to be training in. Like I say, don't spend all your time there. You need to be doing some aerobic endurance work as well. It kind of depends on how much time you've got. The more time you've got, the more aerobic endurance work you can do, the more extra things you can add in. It's going to benefit you. There's a reason that pros are training 25 hours a week, 30 hours a week. Some of it is overkill, but some of it is also, there's a benefit to doing aerobic endurance sport in the sport. So be prepared for that. You want to be spending time there. On the swim side of things, you want to be incorporating a bit of speed work. As well as your aerobic swimming, you want to be incorporating sets that allow you to get a feeling for the kind of training you are doing. So the kind of racing you were doing, So you want to be able to feel threshold because like we already said earlier, when it comes to racing, you've not got any guidance on actually what pace you're swimming. And actually because you haven't got turns and things anyway, it kind of becomes a bit of nonsense because actually if there's a tide, if there's waves, you need to know how you're feeling. You need to know how threshold feels. On the run, on the bike, making it specific. So like we said, zone 3, zone 4, in aero position, if it's a non-drafting event, making sure you've got that nailed and make sure you know what you're doing there. Spending some time in those sessions, doing those sessions. And then, like we've already mentioned, you probably want to throw in a couple of brick sessions there every now and again, just to make sure you're practicing things like transitions, actually the feeling for ring off a bike, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of stuff I'd be incorporating.
To what extent might you mentioned speed work on the swim? But you mentioned speed work on the swim,
Go
but
on.
to what extent might you include like high intensity work above threshold, so zone 5 in a 5-zone model, on the bike and the run?
So on the bike and the run, so I would definitely include a bit of it, and I'd probably stop including it so much towards the event. I'd incorporate bits of it. So I'd incorporate strides and things, which is obviously zone 5 for a lot of people, or would be if you did it properly, in running. I'd incorporate the odd sprint and cycling. But as you get close to the event, you probably want to be focusing more of your energy on the actual race specifics of things. So incorporating it in training, incorporating it as drills, as things to open your legs. But the closer you get to the race, the less of that I'd do. Not saying that it's useless, just saying that I'd save your energy for the sessions that you're doing. But yeah, definitely a place for it in your training, for sure.
Right. And then the next question is, how would you distribute training between the 3 different disciplines, swim, bike, run? And also we can throw in strength training here.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you've only got 8 hours a week, then, you're looking at basically, probably 2 swim sessions, 2 bike sessions, and 2 run sessions. That kind of, for me, is, and a strength session is what you want to be doing. And obviously, in terms of duration of that, you probably want to be, you're going to have to incorporate some different aspects to those sessions. So yeah, for a swim session, you want to incorporate a bit of speed work, a bit of aerobic work, a bit of specific work to your race or your event as well. So what kind of pace am I going to be swimming at? So like we say, if it's 1,500 meters swim, you need to be able to swim 1,500 meters as your beginner. If it's an advanced athlete, you're going to be wanting to swim 1,500 meters at threshold. So you're probably going to want to do a session like, off the top of my head, 20 by 100s at threshold, because we have a bit of recovery in between each 100 so that you can actually swim threshold. That kind of set is the kind of thing you want to be doing if you're more of an advanced athlete. On the bike, again, making it specific, spending time in your time trial position. If it's a non-jacketing event, making sure you're, doing sessions specific to your event. So, as I've already spoken about, there's a big range there, but you should be doing sessions in that range of, where you want to be racing as we get close to the race anyway. And the same kind of thing of a run. On the run, I'd argue you don't want to be doing lots and lots of speed work. You want to incorporate a bit of strength work there in terms of tempo work. But tempo is a big range anyway. It can be used to describe a lot of things. So again, that kind of tempo session, if you're an advanced athlete, you're probably running 95%. If it's too long, you don't want to be doing too much of active, wipe you out. But it's just about making it as specific to the event as possible. So, for example, if I had 2 runs a week, I'd probably have a decent warm-up, cool down, a bit of aerobic endurance in there, and then I'd make it possibly for a 10K for Olympic distance race. I'd make one of them a threshold session and one of them more of a tempo-based session. And then for a sprint distance, I'd probably change that for more. I'd incorporate threshold work as one of those sessions, but in that threshold session, I'd incorporate a bit of faster stuff as well, so more down to VO2 kind of work in that session as well. And I would put a short tempo in there. So in that second session, I'd probably something like 20 minutes tempo, and then something like 3 by 5 minutes VO2 as a hill rep, something like that is what I'd go for. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So not being afraid there. If you have limited time to, so if you have limited time, you're not afraid to have all the sessions include, or most of the sessions include, some sort of quality work at moderate or high intensity.
Yeah, if you got limited time, and that's kind of the bare basics. It depends on your injury background as well. If you're at risk of getting injured, that kind of thing. You want to ease off a bit on the running side of things. You don't need to spend all of your sessions in zone 3 or zone 4 either. Like I just said, there's going to have to be some aspects of them that are a bit easier. And you do want to include the odd aerobic ride, the odd aerobic run, as well as that. So this is, that's just a standard week, but I'd probably, do maybe two run sessions, and the next week I'd do 1 run session and then 1 aerobic run instead. And I'd be incorporating, like I say, plenty of aerobic work in there as well. And then the more advanced you are, not just advanced, but the more time you've got, the more aerobic work I put in there. And this again is remember for a specific block as well. So not base block, specific block to getting close to racing. In that base block, you probably won't include a bit more aerobic endurance work, but you would definitely include more aerobic endurance work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's great. Great advice. And I think in terms of just describing the what you're saying there about the sessions including a good amount of aerobic work in themselves, there's a difference between doing, let's say, 1 hour run with 20 minutes at threshold with a good 25-minute warm up and 50-minute easier warm down, or just aerobic running after the threshold block, versus doing a 5-minute jog and then 50 minutes at tempo and then a 5-minute jog to end. The first one would be more beneficial probably in the grand scheme of things, because you will end up being more consistent in the end when you have both the aerobic work and not too much of that sort of really demanding quality work in the mid zones or even at high intensity.
And then for that running, I wouldn't jump straight in and do 2 1-hour sessions either. This is specific blocks, so I tend to favor doing a bit more frequency for the running over anything else. So if you got half an hour spare, in that base block, putting more half an hour sessions in is a better idea. It depends on how much time you got available in the week though. So if you've literally just got 6 hours plus the strength session to do work, then you're very time limited, and it's got to be at specific times because maybe you've got kids, you got work, that kind of stuff going on. But on the run side of things, I'd just like to add, I'd probably favor a bit more frequency of approach as well, instead of just doing 2 1-hour runs. Perhaps I didn't make that clear, but if you've only got 2 1-hour runs, that's the kind of stuff that I would be incorporating in those 2 1-hour runs.
All right, yeah. So you kind of already did it, but let's do it anyway, and that is to give 1 swim, 1 bike, and 1 run session, a key session that can be used in that specific preparation period for an intermediate athlete preparing for an Olympic distance event.
Yeah, so I mean, something simple like 2100s is going to be great for Olympic distance
How long
event,
recoveries would you give?
At threshold? It depends on the athlete. So you could start off with a session that was 30 seconds recovery between each 100, and then you build that up to, you change the session slightly, but you'd probably go something like 20 seconds. You go 30 seconds for the first 5, and 20 seconds for the second 5, 10 seconds for the third 5, and then if you feel ambitious, 5 seconds for that last 5 is something how I build it up. But you could start off with 30 seconds for all the intervals, and then maybe the next week was 20 seconds, or you could play around about something like 10 200s, or play around with the distance a bit. If you're feeling ambitious as well, you could put 5 400s. That kind of distance. But an example session would be 2100s at 20 seconds recovery at threshold. It's going to be a fairly decent session. That's kind of the staple. You can play around about a bit. In terms of the other thing to think about there is, if you're more advanced athlete, is I'd probably put in I'd probably do 1 week of that, and then 1 week of putting some faster work in. So something like 50 meters hard VO2 effort, so just faster than threshold, and then 100 meters or 150 meters at threshold. So breaking up in 200s like that, and maybe doing like 10 200s of that with a bit more recovery, to get used to that pace breakdown. So that'll be another key session you could do if you were more advanced and thinking about pace variation. On the bike, on the bike, to be honest, I'd be working around your race pace. So, if you're racing, at an Olympic distance, then like we said, you want to be training at a race intensity. So you want to be racing or training in the sweet spot kind of zone, somewhere around there. The more conditioned you are, the longer you hold it for. You can play around with interval lengths a bit. But a nice session would be something like 3 by 20 minutes with 10 minutes recovery at desired race intensity in aero position. I think that's a fairly standard session. Now, obviously, there's loads of different ways of doing that and loads of different things to think about. You could do slightly differently, but that's a fairly standard session, I'd say. That should get results. If your intensity is right, and you can build it up. You can extend the length of your intervals. You can put a few. Like we said earlier, you don't want to get static in there, so you could put a few the top end or threshold intervals. So threshold intervals. So you might do something like 4 by 1 minute of threshold with 20-second recovery into 12 minutes of sweet spot work, just to prepare yourself for the changes in course, because you're not going to be riding on a flat course with no wind. Really, it doesn't really happen. So that's a way you could advance that session, or potentially just making the reps a bit longer. And then in terms of running, we've been over this a bit. So I'd probably incorporate a session that was around 20 minutes to 30 minutes of threshold work, depending on who you are. Now, if you're doing sprint distance, probably 20 minutes of threshold work, but with a bit of that as something a bit faster. So maybe a 5-minute rep of threshold, then some 2-minute reps of VO2 work, and then back to some threshold again, that kind of thing. And then for longer, people are racing events that are, Olympic distance. So something like a 6-minute, a 5-minute, a 4-minute, a 3-minute, and then build all the way back up to 6-minute from there at threshold intensity with half the amount of time you spent running hard as recovery would be a fairly standard session. So yeah, things like that. And then I'd probably, the other session I'm making a week is a tempo session. So a decent long run at race intensity. So, around 30 minutes for most people, probably a bit longer if you're racing Olympic distance. And then, if you're racing sprint distance, you could change it up. You can even change it up slightly for Olympic distance as well, but you can change it up as something like 20 minutes of tempo with some maybe some hill reps. So 3 by 5 minute hill reps as hard as you can go. Or some kind of, if you've only got flat ground, running at VO2. Another way of actually measuring your robustness I like to do with athletes is with a build run. So you could do something like 4 by 8 minutes or 5 by 8 minutes. So starting in zone 2 and working all the way up to race pace, and actually thinking, can I actually run at race pace having done that work beforehand, is a nice session to do to complement the tempo session. So maybe every 3 or 4 weeks, throwing that in. But yeah, they're standard sessions. I hope I haven't made that too complicated.
Oh, no, those are great. I really like them. And so then if we take the final question here before redoing the rapid fire questions that you did a few years ago, but a summary of today's discussion, what do you think are the 3 most important take-home messages to leave the audience with?
So, yeah, I was thinking about this, and, it's quite hard to say. So, I know there's a lot of things that I've mentioned and a lot of things that I think are important, but the thing is, the first thing I'd look at is actually know what you're aiming for. So know what you're trying to achieve. But if you don't know what you're trying to achieve in a race, or you're trying to achieve in a season, then you don't really know what you're training for. So how about set out and have it clearly defined? It's got to be realistic, but, your coach or maybe a friend or maybe your partner, someone can help you with that and, provide an objective view. Okay, yeah, it's realistic, or maybe it's not realistic. The second thing is, look at the specifics. So look at a specific event, look at where you're racing, look at what the course is going to require you to do. You want to know, you don't want any surprise on race day, but you also want to know exactly what you're training for. So if there's loads of turns in the course, you turn every 10 seconds, bit of an example, but you want to be making sure that actually you are, practicing for that. If it's just going to be long, straight road, then also practicing for that as well. And then thirdly is, don't forget, it's an endurance sport. So especially with sprint distance, it's still an endurance sport. It's the event that's going to take you an hour to 2 hours, that kind of region. Most people are going to be in that kind of region. So just remember it's an endurance sport, and train for it like it's an endurance sport. Don't neglect those, those longer sessions and those aerobic sessions, or just the aerobic work in general. And I'd actually like to add a fourth one in is, just enjoy it. It's a sport that, you should be doing because you enjoy. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, don't do it. But yeah, enjoy what you're doing and try and enjoy the journey as well. And remember that training is part of it, part of a journey. Actually, if you're not enjoying the training, you might not enjoy the race, or you might enjoy the race, but you got to enjoy the training as well. Because I think those two go hand in hand, and that helps with the consistency of the training as well, and it helps to balance the training. So enjoy it if you can. Okay.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent points to finish the episode with. So now I just thought that we might do this because it's been a long time since we did this the first time, and these are the rapid fire questions, and you might have changed your mind on something of it. So let's take them. And the first one is: what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to endurance sports?
You know what? I don't think I'm going to change my answer here. So I'm going to say it's still people. I think you can learn a lot from people. So I'm lucky that I've been able to meet a lot of different people. But I would, whoever you meet, I think they've got something to add. You know, whether or not you agree with them, is just take what they've got to say on board, and you don't have to implement it, but just be aware of that kind of thinking. Because I think a lot of time in this sport, you know, people kind of get tribalized, and that's completely different. And actually, people have got things to add in. And even a beginner, even coaching beginners, they add in things. They help you see things from different perspectives. So don't write anyone off, and learn from people. That'll be my take home there. Is I take things from people a lot. Sorry, that wasn't 15 seconds, was it?
No, but that's great. And next one, what's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
So I'm going to say my bike, my Orbea. I'm going to be slightly controversial here and say my Aerobic, not my time trial bike, just because I just really love it. And the reason, I just really love riding my bike. It's not. I think a lot of people would say that kind of thing. It's what I enjoy doing. So for me, that's the best thing I've got.
And finally, what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
Well, triathlon's a sport where you often don't get what you train for or what you want, what you're aiming for. So it's not to give up after the first time of trying. Just keep trying and never give up, is what I'd say. And I think, when it comes to triathlon, a lot of us in this sport are very dogged, and we will keep going with it. Knowing when to change a tactic change tact is important, but also not giving up, I think.
Yeah. And that's something that, it's easy to say, but I know that you really live to those words, knowing you. So it's not just talk. You're definitely walking the walk.
I think a lot of triathletes do, actually. So I don't think I'm alone with that one. Yeah. I can think of a lot of people who would do that. Yeah.
Right. And finally, where can people find you on social media? And do you have any idea where you will be racing this season?
So social media, mostly on Instagram at the moment. I do have Twitter, I do have Facebook. I do use Instagram more for that kind of thing. Just showing what I'm doing really, and race side of things. I'm going to race whatever I can, and I was chatting with you beforehand. It's going to be. I'm hoping to support the PTO stuff. I want to go with that. I want to try and qualify for the Collins Cup. It's a big game this year. That's kind of my aim is to be racing Collins Cup and also World Championships 70.3. In terms of races I'm going to do that, at the moment, I'm not too sure. I'm in Marbella, which is at the time of interviewing, 12 weeks away, not minutes, 12 weeks away. So might go ahead. If not, it'll be slightly later than that. But when I can race this season, that'll be good enough for me. I know that is
right,
but I'm hopeful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, James, for taking the time and sharing all this information with us. It's been great to have you back on the podcast, and I hope to have you back again soon for another episode.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. See you soon.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview with James. As always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com, and you can find links to James's coaching profile there, right on the coaching page, and also his Instagram. We will also have direct links to all of his previous appearances on the podcast, including both regular episodes and Q&A episodes. So they will all be in the show notes and in the episode description. On Thursday, we have another Q&A coming out as usual. And then next Monday, I have another scientific triathlon coach, Lachlan Kieran, on the podcast. And we will discuss the balance between training load and recovery and advice for planning and executing your training with that balance in mind. So stay tuned for that. Subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. If you're looking for ways to take your training to the next level, then do check out the training plans and coaching services that we offer on scientifictriathlon.com. And we're confident that we can help you improve your triathlon or endurance performance. Finally, big thanks to our sponsor, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Go and take their free online sweat test to get a personalized hydration strategy for your next race. And use the discount code That Triathlon Show 15 to get 15% off your order. And thank you to Roka that you can find on roka.com. Check out their wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses, and get 20% off your order with a promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.